Welcome to another episode of the Intentional Intern Podcast. I hope everybody is doing well and holding up during these summer times because personally, I'm not a fan of summer. The heat takes me out every time, but nothing cools me off faster than a cool drink and even cooler conversations. And speaking of cool conversations, that leads me to introducing our amazing guest for this episode, Lenny Zaleski. Lenny is an undergraduate student at the University of Dayton, majoring in communications with a concentration in public relations, commonly known as PR, and political science. Beyond his academic aspirations, he is also the founder of Civic Link Communications, a public relations agency that provides fractional support, advising, and project support to governments, nonprofits, and civic groups. During this episode, Lenny guides me through the expansive world of PR. We cover PR jargon, planning communication processes, doing work of PR within government agencies. We tackle a lot. On top of that, we switch gears from PR to talk about perspectives, ranging from our thoughts on personal branding as emerging professionals to the discourse surrounding Gen Z's work ethic. For those who want to connect with Lenny, his LinkedIn will be linked below, and I encourage you all to check out his portfolio at lennyzaleski.com. With that, let's get into the episode. Hi, Lenny. How are you?
Hey, Amaya, I'm doing really great. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's almost Friday.
I know we're getting there. It's so close.
Exactly. And I want to say thank you so much for just joining us on the podcast today. Really going to appreciate all of the insight that you can give us in everything that you do. And I'd love if you could start our audience off with an introduction. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Lenny. It is so nice to meet all the potential viewers here. I'm a junior communications and political science major at the University of Dayton. I've primarily worked and interned with nonprofits and local government, and I'm off to the federal government this summer for an internship, mostly working on like government public relations, community engagement, community outreach work, and focusing a lot on like social media, media relations, and like image management, crises, that kind of work. And I think that's about it. So yeah,
You do a lot, it
I try
seems.
my best.
I totally get that coming from another side of the community engagement space in HR. There's definitely a lot that goes into that. And you do a lot of interesting topics within public relations and PR and media and things like that. Can you talk about how you got to PR and what made you want to work in that space, especially with what you do right now?
Totally. So I started off originally at college wanting to be a diplomat. Clearly, that isn't what I picked, what I wanted to do at all. Um, During my time in my freshman year, I was feeling kind of unsure about if that was like what I actually wanted to do, or if I just thought it was cool to read books about like foreign service officers and like the, you know, uh, like super secret top spy stuff. And I think it was more of that than the former of like genuine interest. And so I originally started volunteering with a few nonprofits to get these like community engagement hours that we needed for a program that I'm still a part of at my school now. And I kind of just fell into it. It wasn't like the stereotypical, oh, you're young, you do this. I just kind of started doing it as I was doing like a year of service with AmeriCorps as well. And from there, I kind of got really interested in how to do it for nonprofits because we worked like, work, serve, whatever you want to call it, with a nonprofit partner. So I got like really interested and invested in that space at first. And then I kind of kept doing that, did it a lot during a summer internship that I had freshman year, which I was really lucky to be a part of as a freshman. And then I ended up getting an internship with a local government office my sophomore year, and that's where like my interest really took off from there. I ran a like event marketing campaign for them, ran a community awareness like image management campaign for them. Those were like the first two major things that I had to my name as like portfolio projects or like case studies kind of. And I really fell in love with it from there. Then in the summer, continued with that. Worked at a university in London doing marketing and communications, and then I got a chance to intern with another local government office, and it's just kept going from there with my interest in this. I've kind of pivoted more towards public service in the government sense because I found it to be really unique because there's no sell on anything. We're more about working with the community, engaging them, being a community listener and a community partner, and then responding to those needs with what we like communicate and talk about to the public. I love nonprofit work, but for me, it's still awkward sometimes, like doing stuff that like asks for donations and things like that. I prefer more to like either entertain, educate, advocate, and then like get people motivated based off of that stuff. So that is pretty much the summary of how I got into it, and then it's just kept going from there. I've went so far as to start my own consulting practice now with all the work I've done. So I have two clients at the moment. The company is called Civic Link Communications. Anyone wants some free advice, feel free to schedule your 30-minute consultation. And that right there is why I hate doing marketing. I'm not good at selling, but I do like talking about this stuff. And I think that opens people up to it. And I kind of just do that professionally now, pretty much.
That's amazing. Like, that is a lot of good intentional work that you do,
Thank
and
you.
I totally understand. I couldn't be in marketing either, and trying to vet, sell, none of that.
Nah.
Could not do it, and I thrive off of, like, those organic and intentional
Hmm.
communications and relations that you can build with people, and starting from that point of just having that foundation and that baseline and building yourself up throughout your portfolio to where you now have a consulting firm of your own and taking on people. I mean, that's a very huge accomplishment. What was that
Thank you.
process? What was that process like for you of doing that?
It's hard. I wish I could say like it was an intentional, fully linear process, but like any college student knows, it's not, a linear process. I would say like maybe advice if you're looking to like, I don't know how to phrase it, but maybe level up, your kind of like career standing in college is just get interested. Like I genuinely think without the passion behind what you want to do, it's gonna fall so flat for you because you're not going to be as engaged with what you're doing. You're not going to be kind of like a student of the game. That sounds so corny, but it's like the only way I could think of phrasing it right now. Like, you're not going to be genuinely motivated to keep doing more and learning more. And like, I can't tell you how many jobs or internship offers I've gotten from just talking to people about this stuff. Obviously, you have to be a little strategic, kind of place your bets well on who you're talking to and building those relationships. But like, most of the time it genuinely just comes from like I'm really interested in this, I want to learn more, tell me more. And they're like, oh, this is a person that could grow in the stuff they want to do. I want to work with this person in the future. And it's definitely a bit of simplification at times. I'm sure it's tougher for other fields and other majors than this layout, but I think for like PR, comms, marketing, even like HR, employee stuff, and like internal comms stuff, it really comes from like your genuine interest. And I just kept making those connections and kept learning from people. And eventually I built enough trust with people that they wanted me to do this work for them with actually like producing results. It wasn't just, and not to say I haven't done that in internships. I like to pat myself on the back that like I've done some good work, but it reached the point where I had enough to show for my work that people were like, hey, this is a person that we could actually like pay to produce meaningful stuff for us. Not just check a box on doing like intern type work. So that would be my advice for going about it. Get invested, get really interested, love the stuff that you want to do.
Yeah, and that goes a long way. And speaking on PR, and that's kind of interesting to me of, just talk to people, especially since the PR world from what I know and maybe majority of people know is we see PR just from like the celebrity space or
Hmm.
from the influencing space. So it's like, it's a very hard market to get into in that way. And so you talking about, just get interested and talk about it and having that other lens or that other framing of what PR is like is super interesting to talk about to the
Hmm.
audience. And I noticed you talked about some phrases like image management and things like that. I don't know if those are the same within the PR in the Hollywood world versus the PR in the government world, but what are some of those buzzwords in that vocabulary? What do they mean?
Totally. And this is unironically one of the most important parts of our job is breaking down the jargon and the BS, pretty much part of my French. So image management in like public service PR is very focused on how you're perceived by the public eye and how much they trust you to provide the things you're going to provide. So I think some great examples like the Wilderness and Forestry Service has a really great public image. They have a high level of public trust put in them because they're super engaging and they do work that most people would consider like a pretty basic common good. Like no one's going to argue that like protecting forests and wildlife is a bad thing. Well, I mean, some people would, but that's a different debate and I'm not here for politics, but like then you take like a group like the IRS. The IRS has to do a lot more work on image management because a lot of their work, although necessary, like for the function of most things, in the country, they struggle with managing their image because they're doing a service that's difficult for people to get behind sometimes, and that people with different political affiliations will feel different about. They also might just have bad personal experiences because it's a really highly automized system, automated system. And so image management is really about building public trust and credibility that you'll be good at what you're doing and you're going to help the people that you're like primarily serving pretty much.
And from that communication standpoint, because image does seem like everything in any part of PR, so I'm super interested to understand kind of like what that looks in like a communications perspective. Like when you first start thinking about, oh, I have to communicate this, or I'm having to share out this knowledge to the public in a certain way. What is your thought process like when you're starting a communication process?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's actually just something I was like writing a blog about for my company because I love like contributing and updating stuff. Great for search optimization and all that fun stuff. And pretty much, I would say like the bare bones of when you're starting out is the first thing you want to do is set your goals. So you want to figure out who we're trying to reach, what we're trying to have them do, and why is it important, pretty much. And then the second one, which I actually frankly argue is more important, but you always start with like what your goals are going to be, which is audience understanding. So you want to know like basic demographic information. Maybe you surveyed this group before if you have the budget to do that. Maybe this is a group that shows up most consistently to participate in this type of service and things like that. So there you go and define like what groups you're trying to talk to. And from there, that goes into like picking your channels. So like where do you want to communicate this information? Is it in-person flyers? Is it partnerships? Is it media relations work and like media pitching, press releases, all that kind of stuff? Is it more social media based? Is it like through email and newsletter because this is like a really already loyal, ardent supporting group and all those types of things? And then from there, you go into like your strategies and tactics. So you set like the ways you're going to accomplish the goals you already created, which are the strategies. And then tactics are what we're going to do to actually meet the strategies. So this guy, I feel like I'm talking like my PR professor would be like so proud right now. I do remember this, Dr. Han, I promise. So you would think of like a strategy as like, let's say like utilizing your digital channels for like a Gen Z or millennial audience or something like that. And then your tactics would be like how you work to promote something through like Instagram, or let's say there's a group of millennials that often subscribe to like your newsletter. That's like how you're going to execute the strategy that you set out pretty much. So that's kind of the front to the back. And then you go through like the reporting process, how well you did, did you meet your KPIs, your goals? People choose all different words to define them, but pretty much just comes down to like, did we accomplish X and what was X like at the beginning? So that's the process from front to back pretty much.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty scheduled, like structured out and elaborate process, but for all the right key things, especially for the impressions that you guys are trying to make, not just internally, but externally in anything customer
Mm-hmm.
facing. So, I mean,
100%.
it makes sense. And I know you probably have tons of fun going through all of those steps and phases. And I want to ask, what have been some of your favorite pieces that you've written that you've put out? Do you have favorites?
Yeah, for sure. I would say probably in terms of like an individual thing instead of a project was this blog I wrote for a climate nonprofit. It was during my first year of college. It was like the summer going into sophomore year, and the blog is, I think it's called Intergenerational Conversations or something like that. And it's actually about how my grandpa's own like environmentalism work that he did at his house kind of came to influence me and wanting to work in more like climate focused spaces because I feel like that's a really important issue for people our age. And we've all firsthand seen the effects by this point. So it's become a pretty crucial thing. And I had a really great time because it was part like interview, part storytelling, and part narrative. And it actually trended as like their fourth most popular blog post of that year. So you also saw like the results of what like a good captivating story does for people, which is kind of one of my taglines. Is I'm always about telling the story that's going to resonate with people rather than just like slapping some jargon on there, like slapping some numbers. Even if you use numbers, data doesn't tell a story, doesn't do anything without you doing something with it. So that's probably my favorite individual piece that I've written. I'm also happy to talk about like any of the more like longer term stuff that I've put together because it's really fun to talk about. I love the process of it.
Please tell us.
Yeah, so I would say my favorite one, and this is probably some recency bias, but it's on my portfolio page. It's called Buy with Confidence. This was a campaign that was created by me along with my supervisor and two coworkers at the county auditor's office where I interned during my junior year of school. So literally just a few months ago, pretty much. We basically saw an uptick in real estate scams happening to immigrants and first-time home buyers in the county, particularly concentrated in the city of Dayton, like the city that I go to college in, which is the main like population hub of the county. And what would happen pretty much, to not overcomplicate it because this has a lot of like weird legal stuff that I don't understand at all, frankly, is that pretty much people would buy properties on places like Facebook Marketplace or Zillow thinking that they're getting an amazing cheap deal, and they would have to pay in cash, which some people might see that as a red flag, but for a lot of people in countries where it was the norm to buy things in hard currency rather than credit, it's actually like pretty normal. And this was why a lot of people got goaded into this kind of stuff. Um, then what would happen is you would suddenly find out that the property has like $10,000 in unpaid property taxes, or in some of our most extreme cases, families had their homes slated for demolition and quite literally woke up to the demolition crew and the wrecking ball coming to their home. So it was very extreme to say the least. And what we originally thought was, let's put together some events about this and let's like get the resources out immediately. And kind of my idea for it was, let's pause a second because this is a major story to tell. This is a problem that is going to affect a lot of people. And sure, we'll get some people coming to the events, but we're not going to reach the people who are casually going to peruse and get interested in this type of stuff, even if it's just to like show it to a family member or talk to their friends about it or put it up at like your neighborhood community center's bulletin board, all of which are actually really valuable stuff that are sadly really difficult to track, but you can still assume they happen and they're still very important. Um, so we turned it into a full campaign. We titled it Buy with Confidence, created a logo for it. So it's become like a permanent program that we're running now at the auditor's office. And then I basically put together the PR plan for it, set our goals and strategies out, with our number one goal being to either increase the number of people who were calling us for assistance so we could identify how severe the problem was, or to bring more people to our website with the real estate resources under this new campaign page to hopefully alleviate the potential of this happening again. Equip people with the knowledge to kind of avoid these scams. Because one of the problems is that for the most part, at least as far as we knew, they are totally legal to do because selling a home with property taxes or like burden other burdens on it like repairs and other stuff is illegal in Ohio where I go to school. So even though there was no legal problems, there could have been issues other places, and there also could have been, of course, moral questions about it. So we worked with a bunch of different reporters, pitching our stories together and coming up with different ways to do this. We actually brought in a couple of families who were affected by this and had them work with us to like get their media releases signed and kind of like tell their story. And we ended up getting published in I think 5 or 6 different outlets. We did 2 TV interviews and 3 digital news placements. And then we also held a bunch of events during this and also ran a short Facebook ad campaign and also did some organic social media around it. And by the end of the campaign, we had reached, I think we had like 20,000 impressions and we had about 7,000 visitors to the website, to this web page specifically for Buy with Confidence. So we pretty much catalog that as an immediate success. That's a ton of eyeballs aware of these scams and what's going on. We also had around 30 new families call us for assistance. So pretty much by all accounts, we counted this as a huge success. And to me, what I love the most about it was the mix of like interactive, engaging stuff like in-person events, which interactive content is one of the most important things and like trends happening right now in marketing and PR. And we also did a lot more traditional, like by the line stuff, working with journalists, sending out the press releases, putting up the notices. We even got creative, went with some ads being placed online, which we also translated into Spanish because that's the primary demographic being affected by it. So to me, it was watching all those pieces come together, and like that was pretty much like a news cycle for like the city, which is, kind of setting that at 21 years old feels crazy, but that was also like incredibly important for those people to get the help and resources that they needed. And we also made it a brand awareness and perception win by all accounts. We had immediate brand awareness increase through new web traffic and brand awareness through families calling for support. And that was more people now that we could help with getting payment plans put together so that they could keep these homes. So to me, it was the perfect fusion of doing a social good and also putting together something that supported the place I was a part of and thinking of us as a brand, like thinking how we can get out in front of things and set narratives. And to me, that was perfect.
Right. That seems absolutely amazing for one. You guys not only acting as a brand, but acting as a very helpful resource for everything that was going on
Hmm.
during that situation, because that's tough. And I think one thing that is so commendable, especially from a PR standpoint and the work that you do, is that it can be hard work to do because you're doing a lot of different research. You're tackling a lot of hard and challenging topics, and at some time that affect other people. And that can be very hard to orchestrate very captivating stories that actually tell what's going on. But not only do that, you're also providing a way of assistance. And that's
Hmm.
huge that you were able to do that and that you and your team were able to do that, especially with the group of people that you reached and then all of the different campaigns and media that you were running from the TV support down to the web impressions. I mean,
Yeah.
how long did that take you guys in total?
In total, like planning to execution was about 4 to 5 months. The actual like running of the campaign, and technically you could still call it ongoing because we're hosting events like right now, even though my internship ended, so I'm waiting to move to DC for my next one. Basically the bulk duration of our media work ran from March to April, and we had about 5 pieces of coverage during that time. So, very much like helped set a news cycle for that month and really got people aware of what was going on. It was actually hilarious because this our program, we got this campaign delayed like 2 times in the office just due to other priorities that needed to happen. And one of the most unfortunate parts to me is that like com should be like the number one, maybe not number one priority, but should be like really up there for most like local governments. And the US actually like falls behind some other countries in terms of like their PR, corporate comms, community outreach, whatever you want to call it, structures. We usually people are dealing with a lot smaller teams at the local level. Like the internship I did sophomore year, I was the only person as a student doing any communications work for them. Primarily, there were staff who would like contribute and do stuff, which is unfortunately added work to them that they technically shouldn't have to do. It's not in their job description. And then at this place, at the auditor's office, we were in a team of three, and then me as an intern. So team of three and a half, pretty much, because I was part time. So when you think about it, like imagine the impact you could have with like a team of 5 or 6. People who know how to buy media, people who know the writing side, people who know the design side, people who know the digital side. It really like makes me think about like how much more we could do, which is why I'm really excited to be like with the federal government this summer, because I'm going to be a part of a much larger team, and I'm looking forward to seeing like how that flows, and maybe like is there more bureaucracy in it because of that, and just a lot of good questions to hopefully figure out as I go there.
Exactly. And I was thinking down from like the federal government is completely different than the local, right? And so the audiences that you may serve at the local level, they're probably a little bit more intimate than at
Hmm.
the federal level, where there are probably multiple different audience that you have to
Yep.
communicate to. How do you create communication like cascades for that? What do those forms of communication look like in general? That's going to be so interesting, and I'm so excited for you.
No, for sure. I'm really excited about it too. I'm really looking forward to seeing kind of how we put those things together, because I have ideas definitely in my head about how we might be able to do it, but you're not going to know unless you try. And I'm also not going to, learn unless I'm there listening and like kind of, filling in my gaps and figuring out like how it is we do what we do. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that.
Yeah, and you're exploring it in a different place than you are now. I know you talked about you went to London once, you're currently in Ohio now, you're going to DC. What is it like for you traveling for the career that you want to be in? What is that like? How do you deal each time that you
Hmm.
go to a new place?
Yeah, for one thing, I curse moving out. Moving out's the worst thing. Like, ever. And I'm being very sarcastic right now. Don't take me out of context. But in my opinion, it is the worst thing ever. Like, tell me why the stuff multiplies by like 16 every time you move to a new location. It doesn't matter if you throw things out, new stuff just magically comes in that you got to box up. And then you got to take every box over you. Usually you're carrying up flights of stairs. I remember the last time I was moving, my elevator was out, and that was like the worst because I barely had any moving boxes. So we were doing it old school with like, the grocery bags that you save. I'm like a true Midwestern family guy. I like have the bags, all in the like stuck in the fridge. I don't know if that is a thing in the South, but it definitely is here. Is it a thing?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm glad that's an American thing. Like I like that that's an experience we get to say is ours, probably. And so, like, jokes aside, though, I think the coolest part is that you learn how different audiences react and engage with things, and how very minor changes make a difference. Like the funniest one I always talk about for like London is words like color are spelled with OU at the end. And that's like something you have to consider because if people are scrolling through their feed and they're like, oh, post from, insert thing here that I'm either a supporter of or I like or I engage with their content and it shows up more regularly, they're going to be like, what Yankee is spelling color with an O at the end instead of OU? Like, those were genuine considerations I had to make when creating our like copywriting for social media posts and creating copywriting for blog posts and news articles that I did on their website. That was like stuff I had to seriously consider. And like, it might sound silly, but like a mistake can be easily pointed out by people and it's very hard to walk it back after you make it. So I would say like a big one is employing a lot more quality control, especially because I've worked at so many different places with so many different like levels of expectation for what it is we do. I remember like during the summer of 2022 when I had my first summer internship, like when I was working for a climate nonprofit, so I kind of like split my time between 501c3, which is a non-political, nonpartisan designation for tax exemption, and then 501c4, which is a political nonprofit designation. So like during that time, there was like record heat waves in Columbus where I live, and during that time, like although I wasn't on as much of the public facing work, I sat in for a lot of those meetings and helped with like writing and drafting support for communities that were being impacted by this. And that was like the first time probably that the gravity of the stuff set in for me. And I kind of took that everywhere I went, that no matter how little a thing might seem, it really pays to pay attention to it. So I would say that's like the biggest takeaway I would have is honestly like you have to pay a really close mind to all the stuff you do because you're going like all over the place trying to figure out what's going to work best in that situation.
No, exactly. And one thing that immediately came to my mind was thinking about how you have to step outside of your internal biases.
Mm,
And
100%.
you speaking on like, oh, I mean, they spell color with OU. I'm genuinely thinking like they're probably reading an article, and if they see anything that says color with just an O, they're like, someone made a typo.
No,
Not
literally, it may not even come off as a, like American centric thing. It might just come off as a actual typo because that's not how they're used to consuming their content. And sure, a lot of people might pass it up, but all it takes is one person to comment on something, for you to then look a little, a little silly in front of, a public audience, which is pretty much like one of the things you don't want working in PR. You want to come off as credible and trustworthy, and if not that, at least entertaining and engaging. If it's things that maybe don't require as much trust buildup. So yeah, it really does come down to like you really have to know your audience. And that's like one of my favorite parts about like working in so many different locations. Like I think one of the funniest examples too that I have of that is for some reason like Dayton loves Facebook like a scary amount. Like Dayton has so many active Facebook groups, it's actually kind of terrifying. Like I don't know like I don't know what Meta did to like get a stranglehold over the city of Dayton, Ohio for Facebook, but like I'm not even kidding. Like even because I'm that's one of my clients actually is the public defender's office there locally, and like I run their social media. We do all their campaigns, we do content strategy, we do copywriting, design, all that fun stuff. Well, I don't say we, it's me, it's my company. I'm the only one. I'm doing all the work. Got to give my credit where credit's due. But one of the funniest things is when I was first meeting with the person who kind of like manages the contract with me and is like my point of contact at the office. We were talking about like I was basically doing like qualitative interviews of like some of the staff, in particular her, just to kind of get a sense of like what's the audience like, what are the demographics, what are like some good category, like some good archetypes we could group them up into and assign relevant content based on that. And the funniest thing that got noted to me during that was people in Dayton love Facebook so much. We've had like 3 or 4 posts go insanely viral for a local government page, like 20,000 reach and like 500 shares on an organic social post on Facebook. And we've done that like month after month for like local community events, like stuff that, while important, maybe we would get like 20 shares and like 30 or 40 engagements for other types of posts like this. But for some reason, people are so highly engaged on Facebook and Dayton. So it's like we played to that audience. We took advantage of the fact that you can include links in Facebook posts and not in Instagram. So we edited and changed up how we would communicate that information based on the platform. And like those minor quality of life changes resulted in probably, I wasn't estimating like at the time or measuring, but I would wager a guess like maybe a 15% increase in brand awareness considering the follower growth and the virality of those posts. So it really is crazy that like knowing your audience works wonders, honestly.
No, that's huge. I mean, okay, shout out Meta, I guess, for
I don't know what it is. Like, and I've asked people, like, this is apparently like a well-known thing in Dayton. This isn't just like a one-off, someone said it. Like, I've received this comment many times before. And like, no one can pinpoint why they use it so much more because, especially for a city that's kind of more teeming right now to advertise to like young professionals, you would think that like Instagram or TikTok would kind of take off more. But Facebook's still like, really popular. Like, I don't have any sources to back it up, but qualitatively, it's like insane how many people love this app. I mean, I have a Facebook too, but I check it like once a year. So, take that what you will.
you're better than me, maybe once every 5 for me.
Oh God, yeah, it is really interesting how like platforms and so much changes like time after time. That would be a whole like conversation in of itself, but it really does speak to the importance of like knowing who you're talking to. And I feel like that is unfortunately something that sometimes gets lost during the process because the other thing that I would probably say as like a disclaimer to keep in mind is that on top of all these really flashy like great campaigns, we're also doing really boring stuff like updating the website with the press release, updating the website with the new verbiage that got asked by legal to include, updating the caption of a social media post from like 2 months ago because there was a FOIA request, making sure it's current, archiving the post for FOIA requests or whatever new like Public Information Act is like in the state and stuff. There's a lot of in between work that goes into it, which I think is why it's very important to celebrate like the big wins and enjoy like the really big stuff that you're doing. But there's also really minor stuff like that, like gotta edit the meta caption for Instagram to say link in bio instead of copy and pasting the link. We do just as much of that stuff, and I'm sure you can relate, kind of working in employee engagement, that there is a million minor minutiae compared to like the nice flashy stuff that I throw on my website and that you probably like show off in your interviews and stuff. So it's like, got to take your wins where you can.
And I love that mentality. I totally agree with you. Legal is definitely one of your best friends in
It is.
anything.
It's
Anything.
hilariously one of your best friends. They'll like it'll bug you because like half your ideas won't ever get, approved and come to life. I still remember like we wanted to run this like really aggressive part of our like campaign for the county auditor's office where we would like comment on housing posts that looked like they might be scams. And I think if our legal department had a hatchet, they would have been like breaking down our door with it when we suggested that to them because that invites certain things. We wanted to get a little aggressive and out there and be kind of more funny with it, but they were like, no, you're not doing that. No, no, no. Like, And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's really sad, but thank you for also like protecting us from liability.
Legal is that friend that everybody needs.
It's like the friend who tells you to get your stuff together after like you've had a really long night out. Like it gets you back on track and gets you focused again, pretty much.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. Speaking on just emotion in PR. And so, how, as a PR professional, and maybe you can reference this with other PR professionals, but a lot of your work, like you said, is externally facing. And so, how do you manage when you feel so passionate about a topic or you feel emotional about a topic? How do you manage to kind of level that when you're working on a
hmm
communication where you can't express all of that?
That's a really great point, and that is like something that we worked on actively, like in our campaign, because like it came into like our messaging and like media prep for interviews and stuff, like making sure to be very specific on which type of language we could and could not use, because like you can't use the word unlawful if nothing unlawful has technically happened. And I think like one of the best like piece of advice I'd probably give for that, especially if you're in like a public sector kind of space, like a nonprofit, a civic group, government organizations, is like I'm trying to find the right words for it, but I would say the TLDR of it is remember that you also don't want people reacting in a way that wouldn't be helpful to like anyone in the situation. Because it could have been really easy for us to basically run like a smear campaign of the people posting these types of scams. And while that would have been great at generating buzz about our name and like gotten lots of hits, because controversy is pretty great and people unfortunately really love hating stuff. I think sometimes I bounce between if they love or hate stuff more either way, but it does sell, unfortunately. Like rage bait content on TikTok is like all the rage right now. Rage. And so what I would say is that like that doesn't help anyone though. It doesn't like accomplish any of the goals that we're setting out or what we're trying to do. So trying to remember that the way we communicate, while you aim to be as neutral as possible, we still have a call to action. We still have a thing that we're trying to get people to do. And it's important that everything you read before that, everything you watch before that on a screen, it's directing people towards that action. So if it feels unaligned with the action and the emotion that people feel in the stuff that you're trying to get them to do, it's going to feel very jarring to them. So that's usually the way I would go about it.
Yeah, and I love that you gave a great example of like, if our company were to go on a smear campaign, for an example, who exactly would that be serving, if
Hmm.
anybody? And
Exactly.
it wouldn't. And that's a really good thing to point out and a good fact that I think, and being so passionate about something that you do and having an outlet where you're having the ability to express that, but from a company standpoint is completely different than a personal standpoint.
Yep. And that's like definitely one of the most challenging things is like you bring up a great point about like in what perspective you're talking from, because it's sometimes really hard to balance the personal with the like outward external facing stuff, because you're using a lot of third person like we language when you're writing, things like press releases, things like your social media captions if it's for like a professional entity and stuff like that. And it's really hard sometimes not to bring your like personal feelings into that type of stuff, even like in the copy and the word choices you make, the emotions you display like in a TV interview or things like that. It's tough not to. And I think like that's a really important reason to have multiple people on your team checking stuff you do, because they're going to kind of help you before you like pop the curb almost before like it happens. They'll kind of tell you to slow down and like maybe take a slightly different angle or approach to communicating what you want to talk about. Like genuinely, like people who edit are like some of the most important people ever. Like I love you guys. You guys are great. It's very important. It's a very important process, I think, for any like type of work, honestly, but especially when you're writing stuff that anyone technically can go view and see at their own pleasure all the time. It's good to have a few checks and balances before you put it out.
Yeah, shout out to editing teams, seriously.
No, honestly, they're great. Like they're so important. Like it's really funny because sometimes my boss is like, "I'm sorry if this came off as a bit harsh." I'm like, "No, this is like good feedback. I'd rather have you tell me how to fix something than just say, 'Oh, great,' and then like all of a sudden I'm in trouble because it wasn't the right thing we needed." Like, it's better to get that active feedback and work on trying to make a better product of anything that you're doing, regardless of like what industry or profession you choose. I feel like that's especially true as a student because like we also got our schoolwork on top of all this stuff that we're talking about right now. So like if we didn't have people editing our stuff and telling us how to make it better, sometimes those grades would look a little bit brutal sometimes. Like it helps to have feedback, I think.
Yep, feedback is definitely a gift, especially for when you're doing your own ventures. And when you were talking about speaking from the standpoint or perspective of a company, and you're saying we versus I noticed that
Hmm.
you caught yourself earlier when you were talking about your consulting firm and you were saying, we, and you're like, well, it's me, like I do everything. So, like, giving yourself the
Hmm.
credit with that. That is something that's also very relatively new to myself as well as I've been working on the podcast. And like, I noticed that maybe this is a collective thing that we all do. We're the only people behind it, but we're saying we because we're coming from the company front. What is that?
Hmm.
What has that been like for you and doing your own personal branding that way?
Oh, it is. That's I'm so. I feel like you read my mind because this was actually something like on my brain because I've been actually like editing and revising both my personal portfolio and like my consulting stuff. I decided to keep them separate because consulting is not like a full time interest of mine. I think it's just really fun to engage with like new stuff and maybe do some work that like I wouldn't get to do because like I wouldn't get a chance to like work with like some thought leadership with this one client that I have because like if I was doing it more part time, the hours would be too much for like what I'd be doing as like a part time 1099 or a W-4 person. So it's like I enjoy that fact that it is separate, honestly, and that I get to craft a brand of like almost like Lenny the PR strategist versus Lenny, the person who is like doing thought leadership about this topic and showcasing his personal work almost. The two are very similar, but I like a very thin line between them when I want to like rather sell myself versus talk about myself. And I don't know if you've like had that happen too, where it can be kind of weird, like when people are asking me about like my company and my work. It's a lot different than if like someone who maybe wants to employ me or do an internship or something like that. I'm talking to them about my work. It takes like almost like a very like 180 like opposite alignment almost. I don't know if you've had that happen, but
Yes.
yeah,
I
very much so.
I definitely have. I think that the approaches are almost so similar because you're most of the time talking about the same content, but you're
Hmm.
you're doing it from two completely avenues of what the purpose of talking about your content is about. And that's something for me, especially when it's going to the point where people are asking me like, "Oh, what do you do for XYZ?" versus to me, I'm like, "Well, I'm still learning as I'm going, thinking from that personal perspective of, well, this is what's going through my head, but this
Hmm.
is what people are seeing." So it's a lot
Yeah.
different in why they're asking me that.
Yep, 100%. And I feel like the easiest way I would like distinguish it is between talking to a client or between talking to like someone in my network, a friend, or a potential or current employer. Because one of them is focused on what I can provide to benefit your organization, increasing public trust, increasing brand awareness, developing like a brand architecture, putting together a PR strategy. Like those are things that I can do for work without a doubt, but I'm not selling you on why you should pay me to do just that thing for you in that like set period of time. Whereas if people are viewing like my personal website, it's a lot more about me holistically. Like it includes like articles I've gotten published in like professional publications. It includes like some podcasts that I've been on, some like recent updates about my life professionally. It includes a background in all the technologies and tools that I've used in PR and like some main areas of skill sets that I map out more as examples of what I would do at a company versus like on my company's website, the services are listed out as deliverables. Like what would a project look like if you wanted to pay for the service for me to do for you? So it definitely like it's a weird line because a thing that I recently changed, I like did like a kind of big audit of my website and looked at like a few very similar consulting firms that do similar PR and messaging work. And a thing that I realized too is that the struggle is when you're a one person shop, people are usually like looking at you for you. You don't have a lot of like affinity or things built up from this like company, organization, podcast, whatever it is that you've put together yourself relatively recently. People are looking at you. So I actually changed some of my messaging and like alignment on my site and in my social media for the company to kind of convey that change because I realized how important it was that they shouldn't really be two separate things per se. It should just be that I'm specifically hoping for two different audiences to see them. And that was the biggest change. I thought about the audience, hilariously enough, like, I'm proving myself right, like, what, 10 minutes ago or something. Um, that when I think about a person scrolling my website for my company, they really don't care like as much about like what the core values of this organization is because it's a single person LLC. So I started including more sections about me, sections about like my background and credentials. But in terms of the idea of like keeping those two things separate, one of my work samples on my personal portfolio has a note that the case study is originally from my company, to keep that transparency and that like, hey, this was originally built for different audience to see, and I've adapted it to to sell me personally for the work I've done on it. So like bear that in mind before you view this sample. So I do think a big part of it is just like understanding who you're talking to about it and kind of treating it as like an extra thing in your arsenal that you kind of have now, which I think is like the best way I've transitioned it to be more a part of me and what I personally talk about while still making it its own thing.
Exactly. I think I hold the same exact sentiments of I want people, in my perspective, to look at the podcast as yes, I'm a person moderating it and I'm like building this up for myself. And I have that unique through line of you're going to hear from me or about something that's going on with me as I'm speaking with these people. But as an entity overall, I want to be seen or I want my podcast to be seen as a service rather than just
Mhm.
me versus when you're just going to my LinkedIn page, for example, like I recently just made a LinkedIn page for my podcast because I realized like
Mhm.
those are two different things.
Yep.
And I'm a completely different person than I am for what I'm looking for personally versus what I'm wanting to be able to provide kind of paraprofessionally, if that makes
Yes.
sense.
No, you hit the nail on the head for it actually, because I kind of had the debates in my head, like, should I be posting on LinkedIn in like a synced up way with my company, like keeping the brand scheme, keeping the promotional kind of idea and like the thought leadership ideas. And I actually decided against it, unless it's to like maybe talk about like a blog I wrote, or like talk about like what a client said about me or something, because that also applies to like me personally. But I've decided to keep all that posted to like my company's LinkedIn page because even though it has obviously much lower ROI, I do want it to be clear that I am building something. There's an architecture here that has me at the head, but I'm actually putting together an experience and feeling different than when you're looking at what I've curated for myself, pretty much. There's that like great line in the sand about basically who do I want to view X and who do I want to view Y. And I think like a big way that I also look about that is like on my personal website, I never include the word services or consulting. My website is not my company website is not linked at all in my personal one, mostly because I understand that if you're coming there to learn more about me, you're probably not interested in me soft pitching you on hiring me for a project at that moment. And while I trust my credentials, I also know I'm a student. It's probably going to take a person like meeting me individually, getting to know me, and maybe working out a price that would be slightly lower than like a full time professional with like 4 to 5 plus years of experience. So having that bit of separation is really nice because I also want to show it off as a product that I built for myself. Like I include building my company as a portfolio sample because it's like this is something I did still. Like it's under me and I'm mostly communicating for myself to potential or new clients or current ones, but it still is like a separate professional venture that I'm doing that is not intended to be all I do you know
Mhm. It's not your end all be all.
no, exactly, like you hit the point. I think you hit the nail on the head because when you look at some other people, like maybe people who run a podcast full time, or like people who are like PR or marketing consultants full time individually, like self employed, their pages become all about that because your audience is there. That's who you want to see that content. For us, though, it's a little bit different because this is just something we like extra. It reminds me of like Demarion from Edelman, who founded like the PR Habitat. It's like a co working, networking space for PR people. It's not his only thing. His page is still about his work at Edelman, his own thought leadership, like his own perspectives on his like work culture and what work he's doing. But he still has those pieces in there because he wants his audience to see it, but he's not targeting his audience for that information only. That's the way I think about it. Is like I want people to see it, but I'm not targeting people only to funnel them down that. If anything, I'd much prefer you click on my personal website because I'm interested in working at places, you know, and just doing some stuff on the side, because I never get enough of this stuff. It's so much fun to me. So I feel like it's a really great, like healthy balance to keep because it also feels nice to keep like your personal page and like what you talk about on like LinkedIn and stuff like that for you still and like what you're doing, which now incorporates this great entrepreneurial thing that we have both individually founded and like done on our own time. It's almost in my way more, in my opinion at least, more fun to show it off as that type of thing.
I feel like that's so Gen Z of us. Like, yeah, it's just some fun on the side.
No, literally. See, like, okay, because like people talk so much about like the Gen Z work ethic and stuff. And I'm not gonna like say I agree or disagree with the perspective, but I am gonna ask which Gen Zers are you talking to? Because like the people I know in Gen Z give me imposter syndrome sometimes. So like, who are you talking to? Like, if people give me imposter syndrome, they're good at what they're doing. Like they're working hard. Like I genuinely, in my opinion at least, believe that I'm pretty good about like not straying into those self doubt feelings. Like they come up, but I'm pretty good at like keeping myself centered and like knowing my worth. But like sometimes I'll see people on LinkedIn and I'm like, really, man? Like what? Another internship? Another Deloitte offer? What's next? You got KPMG and Plant Moran also fighting over you. Like it's crazy. Like I really do feel like our generation is like gonna have such a like weird, unique split down the middle of how like we view work. And I do feel like half of it came from like who has found enjoyable purpose in it versus who was like, no, this is a sham. I don't want to do this. Like it's not fun for me. I feel like there's such a divide on that. And I'm not sure like what your thoughts are if you've seen something similar. But that's been on my mind recently too, because like my family talks about the whole like, you know, your generation seems so lazy stuff. And I can see from like what they maybe view media wise that maybe it would make sense for them to agree with that. But then I look at all my friends, like one of my friends just got like a co-op at BP. one of my friends was an intern at the Defense Intelligence Agency last summer and like founded her own like mission service development club as an international development major. So I'm like, who are you talking to that gives you this perspective?
I completely agree. And like shout out to Marion
No,
for
I
the
love
work.
Demary. He's great. I'm gonna send him this podcast episode now because like he has to see this. It's just us shouting him out.
No, literally. Shout out to him for the PR habitat. And I get what you're saying completely. I think for us, and this is so ironic that we're talking about this because I'll have an episode about this coming out soon of just Gen Z being lazy. Where does that come from? And with my anthropology background, I'm such a research oriented person of like, okay,
Hmm.
and in Gen Z terms, show me the facts. Like just
No, literally though, it does make me wonder because like I don't have any like data to back it up like off the top of my head, but at least too from what I've seen in college, like and maybe this is like a proximity bias because like people who work hard will surround themselves usually with people who do the same because it makes sense to be around people who are going to encourage you and try to like give you new perspectives or give you new opportunities and ideas. And like you're going to be motivated by people with a similar workflow and work, passion for stuff, but it's like I definitely know some people who I'd maybe call more on the lazy-ish side, I guess. I really don't like ascribing that word to anyone, frankly, because it's like, what do I care? But at the same time, it's like I've been around so many really hardworking people in Gen Z. Like whether they show it through their clubs, whether they show it through like student research, whether they show it through like activism or like their own hobbies and stuff that they do, or like running an Etsy store, like whatever the check boxes might be, the check marks might be for it. It really is weird to pinpoint where this like narrative suddenly came up.
exactly. And I think for me, in the perspective that I've seen, which you're completely correct of, honestly, Gen Z's definition of work looks a little bit different because of the things that we've
Hmm.
had to go through. Like
No, like 100%, I agree.
starting from COVID, starting from building your own opportunities when there was no opportunities, down to, like you were saying, to the point of a lot of people find the passions of things that they do based on if they find purpose in it. And a lot of Gen Z is refusing to do anything that does not involve their purpose and what they value. And so that's something that I think a lot of companies are struggling with because they can't just pay Gen Z out. It's not a pay thing, it's a purpose thing. And if you have both, great. But there are definitely a lot of people within our generation as a collective who will definitely say, if I don't like it, I will leave. You don't have to tell me.
No, 100%. And I think like another part of the passion part too, and this is like where I always like one of the reasons for me personally that I mentioned this already that I didn't really feel like for profit was the route for me was I just don't like selling that much. I don't really get excited by it. But there's a lot of people who get really excited by products, and I think one of the struggles of companies right now is communicating how that product has any value beyond you trade money for it and you get the thing. Like I think of Liquid Death as one of the best examples of this, and I know like this is cliche, and I think Duolingo is also a great example. Wow, I'm really just am a LinkedIn buzzword hitter. Like I'm checking all the boxes of things that people say on LinkedIn, but they say it because they're true. Like on the surface, Liquid Death should be kind of a joke, honestly. It's sparkling water. But they understand that for a lot of people in different age groups, they might not want to drink. They might want to have a bottle in their hand that looks fun and that looks really cool and is well designed to them. So they sell that experience rather than the product. And people who do work with them, from what I've seen and what people post, they get really excited and invigorating because they're giving people a cool niche experience that you wouldn't get going to a different place. And same with Duolingo. Like I actually talked about this in a professional publication for the International Association of Business Communicators, IABC. Their official publication is called Catalyst, so I wrote a Catalyst article for it. And one of the things I wrote about that the Duolingo did on TikTok what they couldn't have done anywhere else because they built an experience for people. They built a community of people who understood the experience of using their app. Most companies would have balked at the idea. I'm definitely mispronouncing that, but like we're gonna pretend that I got it right and it's fine. Like they would have been like running to the hills if they saw on Twitter people were saying like, "Wow, the owl's really mean to me." And instead, they made a fun, memorable experience out of it. Because like there might be softwares for learning language that are better than Duolingo, but no other group has found the way to build that experience for people that makes them consider using that instead. And I think companies like that are going to succeed when it comes to hiring Gen Z people, and in particular, really talented Gen Z people who want to contribute to something that is more than just a product. They want like an experience. They want to make a social impact, and there's probably quite a few others you could pick, but it's like you got to hit one of your bases for that. You got to go beyond just, selling something, I think.
100%. And I think Duolingo is one of the most iconic brands, not only for that reason that you just gave, but also their pillars of just remaining relevant. And they do it by utilizing, of course, pop culture. So down to the Scrub Daddy collab that they had and the whole
Hmm.
episodes they have with that, down to like the Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef that's been going on, and
Yeah.
utilizing popular audios. It's like it's a whole experience. And I think that's something that is so important to Gen Z because we value versus the pay and the purpose, the experience is so important to us beyond that. And that's something that we want to be able to bring to a multitude of different people. So calling Gen Z overall lazy,
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit misguided in terms of just maybe having an outlier, but that's with every generation. So
Hmm. 100%.
it's a little bit bold to call an entire collective lazy when we have people like you, we have
Yeah.
people like me, we have people like
Hmm.
Demarion, we have people like one of my colleagues who I used to work with at Nintendo of America. She was an intern who just graduated. She was in marketing and she has her own like marketing agency called like the Highway Collective. Shout out to Rhea. It's like people are making their own opportunities now
Yeah.
if they don't see it.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I so agree with that. And I feel like a big like thing, and this is kind of actually one of my hot takes about like government. They need an employer brand refresh within the next 5 years, or they will completely miss out on the opportunity of hiring Gen Z collectively. We're like seeing right now, and I actually wrote about this as an opinion piece in the Dayton Daily News, actually, that we basically have a generational gap in public service at the state and federal level. The local level's kind of experiencing it, but the numbers are much harder to come by. Um, that there's a generational gap of people approaching retirement, people in the middle of their careers, and those early starters, much much older than the corporate and the nonprofit averages up against them side by side. And the biggest reason, and this is where it was weird, and what I my kind of my question or thesis about it was, the government is literally about serving the people. Gen Z want an impactful, service oriented work to some extent that a lot of people have reported in like Pew Research and other like good data collection and like research institutions. So why haven't they been able to do it? And I think the biggest reason why is the employer brand is not there. There are so many agencies, there are so many complex pay grades and things to enter. The federal resume is a behemoth to understand. It actually is kind of cool flexing all your work experience on it, I will admit, like after I built it. But when I was going through the building process, I'm like, man, this is a lot of typing, my poor keyboard. And like I think one of the biggest things though is that if they shifted that employer brand just a little bit and that like employee engagement aspect of like getting people interested in working for them, they would see like great returns on that investment to bring in Gen Z into the fold of working at those places. And especially when there are so many Gen Z in like comp sci and tech, and the federal government needs tech workers for AI stuff and like AI regulation, AI training and stuff. It should be such a great match between the two, but we're not really seeing that as steadily right now. So I really hope that that shift kind of comes in to be focused more on that experience of being there and being a part of some type of mission that's maybe a bit bigger than yourself individually. I think that could really stick out and appeal to people.
Yeah. And to leave us off on a good note, talking about experiences, I mean, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today and giving us, one, so much to think about in general of everything down from what PR is from your standpoint, and how we can work to even be interested in that and get into that. What are some of the hot takes that we have going on within the world of just Gen Z at work?
Hmm.
Looking forward to what you have going on and presenting yourself as a student, but who's also partaking in other ventures like having your own company in consulting and being able to just literally guide us through the world of PR and giving us even tips and tricks on verbiage and how to curate a meaningful audience, as well as how to do communications. I mean, you have been so amazing. And I'm really so excited to see what you do in the future. Crossing my fingers, you get so many clients from this.
Thank you. And same to you, Amaya. Your work is great. I'm so excited to see how this podcast goes for you, and especially bringing like interns and students to talk about stuff and really like cementing that status that like interns and students need to be taken seriously like as practitioners and as people still learning the experience, but also showing what they know about it. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for having me.
Of course, anytime. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Intentional Intern Podcast. As always, let me know what or who you guys want to hear from next, and I'll see you guys next time, sharing another student with an amazing story.